Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Tessa Wegert. Tessa is the author of the popular Shana Merchant mysteries, which include Death in the Family, The Dead Season, Dead Wind, The Kind to Kill, Devils at the Door, and most recently, The Coldest Case, along with the upcoming North Country thriller series. Her books have received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and Shelf Awareness and have been featured on PBS and NPR Radio. A former journalist and copywriter, Tessa grew up in Quebec and now lives with her husband and children in Connecticut, where she co-founded Sisters in Crime Connecticut and serves on the board of International Thriller Writers. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you so much. This is one of my favorite things to do, to come and talk to you. You know, I'm a huge fan, and you know that you're a close friend. So this is amazing.
It's so fun to have you back. And yes, Tessa and I also, we can't talk too much about it, but she and I and Hannah Morrissey are working on a fun collaborative project, which we are we'll be super excited to talk about at some point, but not quite yet. So The Coldest Case, which is the latest Shana Merchant. I'm such a fan of Shana, and I love, there's a lot about Shana in this book that is like super, since we know what she's gone through in the past, it's really fun to see her in this place, of course, although she's of course in danger once again, but
Of course.
of
Always.
course, right, exactly. She wouldn't be Shana if she wasn't in some sort of trouble. So tell our listeners about The Coldest Case.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this book, we've got two Instagram influencers who decide to spend a winter on a remote island called Running Pine. And once they get there, things go awry, and Detective Shana Merchant, finds herself going out there to investigate a crime, to hunt down a killer, and at the same time becomes kind of entangled with a cold case that has continued to haunt her from her days working back with the NYPD. So all of that comes to a head in this book. And I do want to comment too, just to say that it does read as a standalone. It absolutely can work as a standalone. But for people who have read Death in the Family, the first book in the series, or any of the other books in the Shana Merchant series, it also pulls back the curtain on her backstory, her history, especially with serial killer Blake Bram, who she has a very complicated history with. So you do get some Easter eggs, and it's a little bit like you're getting two mysteries for the price of one with this story, because there's the cold case that she's still investigating, still, you know, not wanting to let go, and then of course the current mystery that occurs on Running Pine Island.
I love that. And it's so true. I mean, I am such a fan of series. And I think one of the reasons I love a series, and I think you do this really well, where you can, of course, read the book on its own, which means I think you don't have to, when the new book comes out, I don't feel like I have to go back and read the first 5 books, right?
Right. No
But
pressure to do that.
right. But if you are a series fan, I definitely think you start with Death in the Family and walk, because also there's a big payoff to see how far Shana has come. Even from, not just from what happened to her in New York City, which is super eerie, but also from when she, you know, moved up to you know, Alexandria Bay, and what she's been through since then. So, and like, you know, the stories that involved her niece, and there's like a whole, you get to know her whole family. You get to know sort of the budding relationship she now has with Tim, who is another investigator in the neighborhood. So I think it's worth reading all of them. Of course, we always say that. So it is worth reading all of them. So I'm curious, because it's interesting. Like, this is the first time I felt like one of these stories really did take us back to sort of, obviously Shana's New York City history runs through the stories, because it was, you know,
Right.
it's very important for how she ended up going to Alexandria Bay, and, you know, her history as a detective. But, you know, this is the first time I feel like we really are dealing with sort of two very, you know, separate cases.
Right.
How did that come to be?
Oh gosh. So I knew it.
The hardest
And
question ever. How
I
did you do
know.
that?
I hesitated for a minute because it took a long time for those pieces to fit together, for me to figure out how those pieces were going to fit together. And I knew going into this book that I did want to revisit her time in New York. And like you said, I had touched on that in bits and pieces in other books up until this point, but I had never really delve deeply into what happened, kind of to propel her journey to the Thousand Islands before her abduction, which is not a spoiler. With Death in the Family, the first book in the series, you find out immediately that she had this abduction experience involving the serial killer that she was investigating. So I knew that I wanted to go back and dig deeper into what happened to her to get her to this point. But what I had to figure out was how that could potentially connect to what was happening in the current situation with this current crime that she's investigating. And there's something else, again, we said no spoilers, so I'll be careful, but there's something else going on in Shana's life that you discover in this book that makes it even more dangerous, complicated, treacherous, potentially, for her to be spending time on this island, which really is a deadly place. And we can talk about that too, because before we started recording, I was just saying that this Running Pine Island is based on a place called Grindstone Island. That is a real island in the Thousand Islands, way in upstate New York, right on the border of Ontario, Canada. And so when I spend a lot of time in the Thousand Islands because I'm always up there researching books, on research trips and just spending time there. I've been doing that for 20 years at this point. But when I was there the last time, or one of the previous visits, I learned about this community of people, 8 to 10 people, who spend their winters on this island, and it's really inaccessible. It's really hard to get back and forth. If the river freezes, there might be a time when you can't even get back and forth by airboat, which is typically what they do, or if it's frozen over enough, then by snowmobile. And so this little community spends all their time there. And that was so fascinating to me. And of course, immediately I thought, okay, they're really relying on each other for survival. It's such an interesting dynamic there. But then my thriller brain kicked in and I thought, what could be, what if I was writing a book about this, what could be the most disruptive thing that I could do possibly to this tiny community?
Yes.
And that was to throw, this very quiet, insulated, kind of insular community. And then I thought, well, I'll just throw in 2 Instagram influencers who want to put this beautiful remote island on display online, which of course the locals don't appreciate. And they are not part of the community. They're interlopers. They don't understand how things run on the island. They aren't prepared for the dangers and the cold and all of it. So that created a lot of interesting opportunities for me to explore between these characters, for sure.
Totally. And you call it overwintering, I think in the book. It's the idea that, these people go and they literally for months at a time, right? They won't have access to supplies. I love that when we're on the island and we're in these, because they're of course they're in the homes of these locals, because, when the investigators go out there, because there's a death, they have to, rely on there's not like a hotel or somewhere to stay, right? It's just these like sort of half dozen homes that are open during the winter, and the rest of it is sort of sealed up or, abandoned. And so you get this really look inside what it would be like to, what kind of supplies you'd need. Like, I love that in one of the houses it describes like just like a whole shelving unit of like, canned goods. And
like a grocery store.
because right, you just don't know if you're going to be able to get back and forth, like the idea of mail. And and of course I live in Montana, so I do know, of communities where people are very, very private. These people did not leave, the Thousand Islands, or even like a city, to go to the Thousand Islands, to then go to the most remote place in the Thousand Islands to be like on display. That is absolutely, they do not, and a lot of them, you can imagine, right? A lot of it probably brings out sort of a little bit of the, I don't know how to put it delicately, but, the sort of survivors, the like, a little bit of the end of the earthers, if you will. But so it's
definitely.
really it's a fun place to go. And of course, as you said, your thriller brain, mine too, immediately is like, oh, that's trouble. Right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And you make a really good point, because I think it does take a certain personality to be able to take a risk like this, right? And to feel comfortable being that isolated, that secluded from everybody else for so many months at a time. And of course, the Instagram influencers are completely the opposite. They are all about attention. They are all about, and then of course, to further complicate things, they get involved, the account starts to blow up, and they get a lot of luxury brand items from brand partners and advertisers that, you know, they start to promote on the account. So how would the locals feel about that? The locals who are probably scraping together a
Right.
living, right? Because there's not much work to be done in the wintertime.
No.
So yeah, the more that I could complicate the situation, of course, the
It's
better.
well done. Very complicated. And I also think like that the type of person who moves out there, you know, in a more permanent way is somebody who's likely been let down by the system, right? I
Yeah,
mean, they're,
that's a
you
good
know, they've
point.
had troubles. They, you know, they're not, they're, you know, their pasts aren't squeaky clean.
Yeah,
In some of the
yeah,
cases, they're sort of like, they're there to get, you know, away from, um, their own history. So it's beautifully done. And the other thing about, I feel like all these books is the idea of like water, and in this one it's like frozen water. You know, you
mhm,
always, there's the sort of risks of drowning and the cold. I always feel like when we're in your books, we're like we're sort of like there's always this sort of environmental discomfort, right? Where this is not a cozy little place where, I mean, obviously it can be, but it is not, I don't know that I could live there. I always feel like, oh my God, what happens if the boat, you know, goes over, or somebody falls in, or the ice or the snow. And even where Shana lives, right? She's kind of up this little, I mean, she's, you know, she has a partner now, but she's like up a little, she's not like, there's not like in a neighborhood where if something goes wrong, you scream out and 8 people will show up, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. No one's coming to help. No one's coming if they hear you, if you scream in the, you know, secluded wooded wilderness in the
Right.
wintertime. And it's funny you should put it that way, because I just saw a new review went up on Kirkus, and
Yeah.
the final line in the review was something like, whatever the opposite of comfort food is, Wegert dishes out a heaping portion. And I was like, is that a compliment? Actually, I
Yes.
think yes,
It
because with
is
a
a compliment.
thriller, you want it to be as uncomfortable, as unsettling as it could possibly be, right? It's not
Right.
a cozy mystery. You don't, with these books in the series, I don't want you to come away with a feeling of utter despair after reading the
No.
books.
No.
But of course, there isn't always a completely happy ending. There isn't always a, you know, tied up with a nice, neat
Mm-mm.
little bow. And along the way, with a thriller or mystery, you want there to be that sense of uncertainty and being on the edge of your seat and all of that stuff. So I'm glad to hear that that is coming
Yeah.
up.
Kirkus and I agree. There's absolutely, and I think one of the things that, you know, I mean, that's one of the things that makes a really lasting and strong protagonist like Shayna is survival, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
think, you know, and there's this, you know, this is Killer Women. I think one of the things you know, we talk about a lot in here, and I think it's really important, is that, you know, women are torn by, you know, we're torn by things that men don't always have to deal with. Like first, there's a disparity in physical strength, right? We're never going to be as strong as, you know, an average woman is never going to be as physically strong as an average woman.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
as an average man.
For
And so
sure.
like Shayna's, you know, the fact that she's a martial artist, right? I mean, that's so we have, as women, we look for these ways, some of them, you know, physical, but also a lot of them sort of psychological, to sort of put ourselves in a place where we feel safe. And I think that's, you know, it's part of the sort of journey as a woman to understand also that you're, you know, you're the more vulnerable gender.
Right,
And in some
right.
ways that's lovely. And there's some parts of that that go to the other aspects of this book that we're not going to talk about. You have to go read it. But you know, I love that, because it's like, you know, Sheena doesn't want to be vulnerable. I think no woman really is like, oh, isn't it be so fun to be like the vulnerable one? And yet we all are in ways, you know, you know, around family and in ways that we, you know, wouldn't choose. And so she finds that fine balance between like, this isn't smart for me physically, but it's what I have to do because it's my job, and my job means a lot to me. And I love that there's this part of her that's, you know, sometimes you're like, you want to scream no at her, but it's like, she's
Yeah.
like doing it
Yes,
for
for sure.
and so does her partner, you know,
Mhm.
no, but she's doing it for the, you know, the greater good. And I think that's another thing that's wonderful, is that sort of there's a calling. She has a calling, you
She
know,
has a
and
calling. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Absolutely. Readers over the years, some readers have described her as messy. She definitely, which I think is
Mhm.
very accurate. She definitely doesn't always make the right decisions. She does the best she can with the past traumas that she's dealing with. At the very beginning of the series, you find out that she's struggling with PTSD after her abduction experience. And over the course of the books, you learn, how she's processing all of that. But in the meantime, she is still actively investigating violent crime. So
Right.
she does have to reconcile that with her own demons and her own traumas that she's still trying to overcome. And that does often put her in a vulnerable position. And then with this book, physically, she's more vulnerable, I would say, than she's ever been before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, like you said, she has to rely on her wits and her relationships with her partners and her ability to read people too.
Yeah.
And her, her insight and her incisive kind of nature when it comes to interviewing the locals on the island, the potential suspects,
Right.
and all of that. Yeah, that then is her challenge in this book is trying to come to terms with how this crime is going to affect her personally and her personal life.
Mhm.
And especially because there are the echoes of the crime, the cold case that plays a part in this book as well. That's still, like I said, is still really very much haunting her.
Yes, yes. And I think in addition, she has this wonderful, I mean, we have Tim, who is her partner, her husband now. But there's also these two other women I want to talk about. There's
Yeah.
McIntyre, who is, been in a few books, and actually kind of more recently we have Val.
Yeah.
And I love that those two are, actually both of them in the story. Sometimes we see one or the other, but we happen to get um both of them on the island at a very sort of pivotal moment. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about them, and is there a future for Val? I'm curious about, like, I know you've got a spin-off series, so I wanted you to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about
I'm
that.
happy to talk about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about those two women, and then yeah, give us a little insight into the spin-off series, because that's super exciting.
Yeah. So Val was introduced in the previous book, Devils at the Door. She is the youngest investigator to join Troop D in the Thousand Islands area. She becomes kind of like, in a way, Shayna's protege, but at the same time, she has a lot of skills that Shayna doesn't possess. So Shayna learns something from her as well. And it's this nice dynamic between them of just a push and pull, because it wasn't that long ago that Shayna was the newest investigator on the troop. And now, the tables have turned. And then McIntyre, that's Maureen McIntyre. She's the sheriff of Jefferson County. And she does sometimes get involved in the crimes that the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, that Shayna is a part of the New York State Police, investigates. So in this book, you get all three of them together, which I think is fun. I know exactly what scenes you're talking about, where they're all in this like vulnerable situation. They're all kind of trapped together on the island. And yeah, that's one of the only times so far that you see them all, those three women together, and they all bring something very unique, I think, to the story. They're all very strong in their own individual ways, but they all too, like we were talking about vulnerability, they all have a real soft side, and they also all have their weaknesses in one way or another. So they are all there trying to help Shayna investigate this case. And then the spin-off series, yeah. So a lot of people have asked if this is going to be the last book in the Shayna Merchant series. And I will say it is the last book for now. Never say
Yeah,
never.
never. Yeah,
Never say
exactly.
never. But
Never.
for now, I felt like, especially because I was able with this story to go back to her backstory and her history in New York and
Mhm.
really tie things up in a lot of ways, it felt like a natural place to pause in terms of her character arc and her story arc. But what I am doing for now next is there's this spin-off series that is also set in the Thousand Islands, and the first of those will be out in late 2025. And that's called the North Country Thriller series. And those books are going to be told from multiple points of view rather than just Shayna's point of view.
Okay.
But they will also feature a lot of the same characters that you already know, including Shayna. So her story will continue, but seen through a different lens, which I think will be really interesting, because so far we've only been in her head, right? And
Yeah.
now you'll get to see what it's like to be in Tim's head and know the experience of being in a relationship with her, or in Mac's head,
Yeah.
working with her in various ways. So I'm really excited about that. And yes, we'll see. Hopefully readers will be excited about it too,
Of
because
course.
a little bit of a departure, but I'm not leaving the region. And again, a lot of the same characters. So I think it'll be a fun challenge for me. It's already proving to be a bit of a challenge. It's just a
You're
bit
like, yeah.
of a different, format. And but
Right. You're
yes, I'm
like,
very excited.
huh. Right. Anytime we take on something new, there's like excitement and terror. That's how I
Yeah,
feel.
excitement and
Just like,
fear, exactly. Especially 6 books in. I mean, I was
yeah,
on, this trajectory with this series. I didn't know how many books there would ultimately be, but from one to the next, they just kind of flowed into the other. I had a lot of ideas for where I could take the story. And now it's a little bit like hitting the reset button and going, okay, a lot of the same characters, much of the same setting, but I need to pull back and tell a new story from
yeah.
someone else's point of view. So there is an adjustment period. I think that happens with that, but so far so good. As I write this, actively I'm writing the first book in the series.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And so we were just talking about this also before we got online. I mean, so we're also, we're working on a project together. You're working on that. You've got another project going. You're a mom. How do you, and you're also with teaching. I mean, so there's so many balls rolling. How do you like structure your day? I think people are always curious to know how writers get stuff done. And besides
Yeah.
putting our butts in the chair, like, do you have a set schedule? How do you sort of accomplish
Oh,
this? You're
yes, it's
like,
a
I'm not
very good
sure.
question. I wish that I wish that I was more organized. I'll preface what I'm about to say with that, because sometimes people also ask, all these books in the series at this point, how do I keep track of
Yeah,
everything? Like even just character traits and moments that I need to know exactly what time of the year they occurred and things like that.
right.
I have two little pink index cards that are crammed with writing of all these little
Hilarious.
notes. And every time I start a new book, I think, I am an idiot. I need to sit down and start an actual spreadsheet and fully flesh this out and make sure I have all the information. But I never want to take the time to do it, because then
I
it's time to
know.
work on a new book and I'm on deadline. And so I haven't. All I have is just this little cheat sheet that I carry with me everywhere.
Don't lose
But
it.
no, exactly. But it's worked so far. And then my approach to writing is as almost as frenetic as that, I would say. I just try to, I'm in front of my computer almost the whole entire day, one way or another. But I do try to structure it as much as I can and dedicate, a chunk first thing in the morning, especially if I'm working on multiple projects. I have a hard time toggling back and forth
Sure.
through multiple projects over the course of a day, especially if they're all in the crime fiction space
Right.
with complicated, multi-layered mysteries. My brain just like explodes. So I do set aside time dedicated to, this next book and the first book in this next series. I'll spend 4 hours on that. And then I'll do something else, like some administrative stuff, or prepare for, like you said, I'm teaching some thriller and mystery workshops. So I prepare for that. And then later, once I have enough distance from the first project that I was working on, I'll dive into something else that hopefully then I've scrubbed my brain clean from what I was
Mhm.
doing earlier and can just restart and focus on the the
I
new
know.
task at hand.
I
But
I
it's
always ask, I'm always like, how does everybody do it? How are you doing it? Because I'm like, maybe it'll help me with how I'm doing it. I just
yeah,
heard,
me too.
was talking to Angie Kim actually about this process, and she was saying that she now her new thing. Everybody always has like a new thing,
Oh yeah, give it to
and
me.
I know. And for a while, I was doing the sprints, the Pomodoro method, which
Oh
is
yeah,
where
I do
you
those too.
set a timer for 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break and you do that 4 times, or you can take a little bit longer break in the middle. Anyway, but
Yep.
now the new thing is that you set a timer for, a longer period of time. Andy does 2 hours. I've been trying 90 minutes because 2 hours seems like the whole day. But
Yeah.
you basically don't, you just for 90 minutes, it's all you work on. You don't know, you shut it all off, put it on the focus screen where the words are big and nothing else is visible. And
Yeah.
then the moment the timer goes off, you basically the first time Angie did it, I guess the strict rule is you stop in the middle of the sentence. And Angie said the
Yes.
next day, all she could do is try to figure out how she was going to end that last sentence.
But
So now, which I can totally see. So now she's like, she stops and she gives herself like a minute or 2 minutes to kind of tie it all up. And
Yeah.
then she walks away from it for the day, which, to your point, basically, I think it does two things, right? One, it's like, that is my time to spend on that book for the day. And also, and then it gives you sort of this space to then maybe shift and do something different. But the other thing
Right.
is, she says it's really effective because when you get back the next day, you're kind of like excited to be there. Versus, I feel like if I slog, which is what I do, is slog at a book all day, leave and come back and try to do sprints and come back. And then, I leave it at sometimes at, 5 and sometimes at 10 p.m. And then I don't, you get the next morning, you're like, oh, this again.
This again, exactly. That's a really good point. That's a really good point, because you do want to feel that excitement and energy coming into the project fresh every
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
also that's a good system because you can make a lot of headway very quickly if you're writing in huge chunks like that. I do the Pomodoro method a lot too. And honestly, I don't take the 5-minute break. So I guess I'm
Oh,
kind of doing
yeah, you
something
are.
what Angie's doing, because the 5-minute breaks, as soon as I reach for my phone, as soon as I get up and get another
Yeah.
cup of coffee, or the kids are home from school, I'm talking to the kids, I just lose my train of
Of
thought.
course.
And
Yeah.
then I'm wasting, 15 minutes or 20 minutes trying to get back to where I was.
Right.
So
I think that's it for me,
it's
because
so
mine are like my breaks are as long as my sprints. I'm like, it's not the Pomodoro method. It's like it's the inverse. I'm writing for 5 and breaking for 25. So,
yeah,
but I
it's the
do,
Danielle method.
exactly. It's a not successful method. I do feel like there's, I really do think that, and this is maybe just the lesson of this job, is that I think you have to recreate ways to make things happen for yourself. Like,
Right.
as the project depends on, before we were starting, we were talking about the fact that I'm about to dig into yet another revision on a book.
Yeah.
And I'm like sitting here going, I don't know if I can do this. So I'm looking for now another new method to kind of get through this next step. But
We get really good at talking ourselves out of working, don't you think? I am such a master procrastinator. When I'm on a super tight deadline, my house has never been cleaner. Everything is
I know.
organized. What I'm like making homemade snacks every day after school for my son, like baking things,
Yeah,
whatever I can
right.
do to not sit down and get it done.
Totally.
And then, but then once I do finally sit down, then the urgency kicks in, and it
Yes.
actually that works out. I mean, speaking of writing process, that I always do toward the end of a deadline is
Yeah.
I just force myself through it. And I always feel like if I'm writing with a sense of urgency because there's a deadline looming over my head,
Mhm.
then that urgency comes across on the page too. Like if
Yeah.
I have a really exciting action-packed scene, I will
Right.
always force myself to just write through all the way through it,
Yeah.
because that, momentum that I have writing it comes across on the page. It really does.
Yeah. And I think when you're writing, the momentum, I think it's hard to, I think what I'm experiencing, and I think what happens to all of us too, is writing is one process and speed. Revising is like a totally different
Oh, totally
process.
different.
And so it's just like, you have to, in every year you have to shift 6 times between, okay, now I'm writing and now okay, Teddy, no, sorry. Teddy's barking at his brother. I'm like, this is not the time. Anyway, this is a house full of dogs right now. I have four dogs at home.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, come here.
Keeping things interesting.
I know, right? Just exactly what I need. Come here.
He wants to be on camera.
Yeah,
Put him
he's like, this is Ted. This is my
Aw,
daughter's dog, Ted. And he's
so
like, what's happening in here? So, okay, well, this is so exciting. I'm gonna go back to your book, because I do think, and
I
one of
have
the
a
things
final version.
oh, that's gorgeous.
Yeah,
I love
it's
that.
nice and glossy and
I
fun.
love that. I know. They do a beautiful job with these books. The other thing I really feel strongly about, and I absolutely love, is that, you left us in a place where, of course, we want more, Shana, but we're not, like, sometimes you feel like a series ends and you're like, or
Yeah.
pauses, I guess is probably the better word. And you're like, I'm not happy with this. This is not where I want to be. And I feel like, I'm just going to say I'm content. I'm content
Oh, good.
for where Shana is, and where they all are. And I think that's kudos to you for leaving us wanting more, but not leaving us on a cliff. Because
Yeah,
then we would,
yeah, exactly. I didn't want to leave it on a cliffhanger ending with this one. Some of the books do
no.
have a bit of a cliffhanger ending, but with this, Each of the books, there is, like I said, that overall story arc of Shana and her life and her, transition from New York to upstate New York and all that stuff.
Yeah,
But there are also individual standalone mysteries
yeah,
involved in every single one of the books. So this one too, I feel like, well, my goal really was to wrap up this standalone mystery in a way that was satisfying too. Like you think, there's a moment toward the end where you think you have all the information you're going to get
totally.
about how this all played out.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, like the second to last page, I
You
throw
do
in
that. Yeah, you do that really well too. It's like, and
a
also
little
there's
something else.
two, I mean, there's two solutions, right? We have the one and we're
Yeah.
like, okay, everybody's fine. It's all good. And then you have the second one, you're like, oh boy, here we go again. So, I mean, that's, you get two really satisfying, resolutions, shall we say, to the two parts of the book. So beautifully done again, Tessa.
Thank you. Thank you so
Super
much.
fun. This book is available right now. It's out on election day, which means you want to go get your copy because the last thing you're going to want to do is pay attention to the
Yeah,
election. I'm
exactly.
like,
This will be a nice distraction.
yes, exactly. And if you order it, it'll probably come on that day, and then you'll get to just dig in and ignore whatever's going on in the world, which is what I like to do the best right now.
Yes, me too.
So
And
Tessa,
I have,
oh, sorry.
yeah, go, 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 go.
I was going to, you have to tell everybody where to find you so they can follow you and all that good stuff
Yeah,
too.
I was just about to suggest that too. So yeah, I have a ton of events going on. Some locally in Connecticut. I've got one in Long Island. I've got one in Vermont. I've got one in upstate New York to launch the book. That's on November 2nd. So kind of in New York City. So kind of wherever you are, hopefully there will be something if you want to come and say
Love it.
hi. And all that information is on my website, which is just tessawegert.com, and also on Instagram. So I hope to see lots of people out and about. And the nice thing is that this is such a wintry, chilling
Yes.
kind of book.
I mean,
And
really.
yeah, if you're looking for, it's the discomfort food, piece of it too. Like you grab your blanket and you cozy up by the fire and you get a little unsettled for a while, but hopefully you want to keep turning the pages. So I feel like
Totally.
it's a seasonal read from that perspective.
And also there's like moments when, the other thing you realize about overwintering is like food is like, you're not eating like a lot of, so when they had that, like when there was stew offered for them, or they had the soup they brought out when they were doing the search for the, missing person, it's like, you sort of feel this like, God, nothing is probably more satisfying in the world than those foods in that place,
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah, I love to throw in those little details too. And a lot of those were pulled from interviews that I did with some of the people who have overwintered in that area. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, there have been missing people up there, hunting
sure,
parties that have gone missing, and
for
people have had
sure.
to search, in extreme, extreme cold and really dangerous conditions.
Yeah,
And yeah, the whole soup story, I won't go too much into it, but the soup, I will say the Christmas trees that create kind of like a trail
yeah,
for people to take along the safe ice while crossing the river. A lot of those things, those two things, and a lot of the other little details and features that I include in the story are pulled from actual fact. That's really just how these people live, which I find fascinating and
yeah.
astonishing.
Oh, it is
Hopefully,
fast. Yeah.
readers will
I
too.
mean, if you happen to be a reader who overwinters, I think you'll appreciate the way it's portrayed. I'm guessing most of us don't overwinter, in which case it is, it's a fascinating life. I mean, I think that's the fun thing about all this fiction, right? Is to read about something that you just have zero intention of ever doing. One, like being tracked by a killer, two, spending a
Exactly.
winter in a very cold, isolated place, like, right? So all of it. So
Nice to
congratulations
live
on
vicariously
another.
through a book instead of having to do it in real life and get frostbite.
Yes, or die of hypothermia,
Yeah,
all those things.
exactly.
So congratulations, Tessa.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
joining me today.
Thank you. Like I said, this is always such a treat. You are amazing. People are going to be so excited about your new book,
Thanks.
which I know you're going to be giving more information about, so I won't say too much. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
we have
just
a long
always
time.
a
It's
pleasure to
okay.
chat with you.
Yeah,
It's
it's
worth the
great.
wait, people. It'll be worth the wait.
Thank you. You're so sweet.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with Tessa Wegert, and we will see you next time. Bye.